Greetings and welcome to this edition of Dharma Dirt from the Old Dog Zendo at Iron Mountain. All these YouTube talks that I've given so far have come out of my practice as a Zen Buddhist. I've picked topics that I thought might be of more general interest rather than the highly specialized commentaries on some of the more esoteric koans. But for this talk and the next one, I've gone way back in time to the original words of the Buddha, or at least as close as we can get to them. For the first 150 years or so after the Buddha's passing, his teachings were passed along in an oral tradition. But then sometime in the 1st or 2nd century BCE, conclaves of Buddhist monks in Sri Lanka were organized to codify the Buddha's teachings and write them down. The result is what is now called the Pali Canon, Pali being the vernacular language of the time. The subject that we'll deal with is Zen practice in lay life. Buddhism and Zen both were initially monastic practices. The Buddha's original Sangha was made up of monks and nuns. The original Chan monasteries of ancient China, likewise. But there was always a few lay practitioners questioning the Buddha about practice outside of a monastic commitment. But when Zen came to the United States, that ratio changed radically. The vast majority of Zen Buddhists in the U.S. are lay people, including many of the teachers. There are some Zen centers where there are a few ordained monks. I can think of a couple, Shasta Abbey in Northern California, Zen Mountain Monastery in Mount Tremper, New York, and I'm sure there are others. Robert Aitken was once asked if there would ever be a strong Zen monastic tradition in the U.S. And his answer was no. There simply isn't the cultural or economic infrastructure. The Catholic monasteries and convents receive support from the church, but even so, they are diminishing. So for better or worse, we're dealing with what is primarily a lay tradition. Some may be disappointed by what will be said here, but there's a serious misconception about Buddhism, and especially Zen Buddhism. The Buddha was not a New Age guy. He did not advocate living off the grid, dropping out, or getting high. Lay life is engagement in family, in society, in work. Lay life expands the Zendo to the household and then to the whole world. There's an early sutra titled Advice to the Lay Person, and the picture that emerges is what many these days would denigrate as old-fashioned. There are some who might even be outraged. The Buddha's vision of the family reminds me of a Norman Rockwell painting, a very conventional, stable, middle-class family that holds to traditional values. And those traditional values are what have held societies together for millennia. If you accept the Buddha as the fully enlightened one, then you have to at least consider his advice seriously. So much of what the Buddha taught is just a matter of decency and common sense. In the sutra, he gives down-to-earth advice on living an upright and honorable life. Robert Aitken Roshi defined enlightenment as the deportment of Buddhas. Deportment, behavior, right action in the world of time, space, and karma. Throughout the Buddha's teaching, the emphasis is on behavior and action rather than any sort of thought patterns or emotions. Thoughts and emotions come up, of course, but they are not relevant. Rather, they are to be let go. There's a bumper sticker that says, "Facts don't care about your feelings." Daniel Greenfield, a rather conservative commentator, writes, "The abandonment of religion, family, character, and all traditional values is not just a Marxist conspiracy. It's the self-indulgent behavior of overgrown children who decided that they never want to grow up." Yeah, the practice of Zen Buddhism, or really any spiritual endeavor, involves becoming a genuinely mature adult human being. The Buddha's teaching, including the moral and ethical teachings, are codified in the precepts, but they were not invented by him. They are not the product of any human mind or intelligence. The teachings were discovered. The Buddha discovered, or rather rediscovered, the way, even as countless Buddhas over countless kalpas discovered and rediscovered it. The Buddha way is the fact and fabric of the universe. To steal Jordan Peterson's metaphor, to violate the Buddha Dharma is to distort reality, to twist the universe out of shape. There will eventually be a snapback proportional to the distortion. That's what we call karma. To understand and live a genuinely moral life is not easy. The manner in which the precepts manifest depends on time, place, and circumstance. It's up to each of us to study and discover the precepts and all the moral teachings of the Buddha for ourselves, even as the Buddha himself did. The Buddha shows the way, but each one of us must walk it for ourselves, using the precepts as our guide. The life of a layperson contains far more distractions and challenges than that of the monastic. It is said that a monastic practices from the outside in. That is, monastics arrange their surroundings to make zazen the only possibility in life, with very few distractions. If you live in a monastery, what else are you going to do? My teacher, Dainin Henry Roshi, spent time in a couple of Japanese monasteries. And in recounting his experience, he said, "Monastic practice is a piece of cake. How can you not deepen your practice in a monastery?" The layperson has to practice from the inside out. The world is filled with distractions and the challenges of work, family, society, and so on. Thus, the layperson has to find the strength within to maintain practice and realization. But having faced and overcome the challenges, the layperson emerges the stronger. This does not mean that the layperson eschews monastic practice altogether. We have periodic retreats called sesshin, in which we live a completely monastic life for 7 days. These are a proven way for us as lay practitioners to deepen our practice, far beyond what we could do even with regular daily sitting meditation. The Buddha was a monk, and he established the Sangha of monks and nuns. So the bulk of his teaching was addressed to the Sangha. But there are a number of places where he spoke with lay people. The most extensive discourse on lay life is the Sigalaka Sutta from the Digha Nikaya, the Long Discourses. Sigalaka is a householder's son who begs for instructions in the way that does not require him to leave home and become a mendicant. The Buddha's reply amounts to a discourse on rules for living. He said, "Young householder, it is by abandoning the four defilements of action, by not doing evil from the four causes, by not following the 6 ways of wasting one's substance, through avoiding these 14 evil ways, that the Aryan disciple covers the 6 directions, and by such practice becomes a conqueror of both worlds, so that all will go well with him in this world and the next, and at the breaking up of the body after death, he will go to a good destiny, a heavenly world." Now that's not so different from the advice Jesus gives to a young man who came to him. He said, "But if thou wilt enter into life, keep the commandments. Thou shalt do no murder. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness. Honor thy father and thy mother. And thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." You may remember that this young man then insisted that he wanted something more, how to become perfect. And Jesus tells him to sell all he has and give to the poor. But the young man is incapable of doing that. For as Matthew ironically remarks, great were his possessions. And in the Buddhist tradition, leaving home, abandoning all possessions, and entering a monastery or becoming a mendicant is just as difficult. How can you leave family, spouse, children? Part of Martin Luther's Protestant Revolution was doing away with monasticism. Monasticism was considered a prideful separation from life, a claim to be more spiritual. For most of us, our practice in this country is the embracing of life in all its aspects, the good, the bad, and the ugly. As we explore the teachings, it will become quite obvious that the rules are mostly don'ts. This is true of the precepts, not to kill, not to steal, and so on, and of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not. Why the negative? The first general resolution is to avoid evil. The second is to practice all good dharmas. But first we must avoid evil. We have a great need for boundaries, moral guardrails. A positive commandment won't provide that. The first resolution is rather like the governor on a steam engine. It limits how fast it can go. Without the limits, things can easily spin out of control. One can be blinded in pursuit of what we think of as a laudable goal, or even a vitally imperative one. But we know full well what has happened in the pursuit of such utopian ideals as communism, socialism, equity, liberté, égalité, fraternity, environmental purity, saving the earth, and on and on. In any pursuit of the good, one must keep in mind that there are limits. Otherwise, the result can be a disaster. Think of the terror of the French Revolution, the Chinese Cultural Revolution, the horrific Russian Civil War, the recent rioting and looting in the United States. Even our pursuit of what we might think of as a good or even a holy life can send us careening over the edge into an abyss of evil deeds. So before we are able to pursue whatever high goals we might aspire to, we have to be aware of the limits beyond which we must not go. The first advice the Buddha gives to the layman is to avoid the 4 defilements: not to kill, not to steal, to avoid sexual misconduct, and not to tell lies. These are the first 4 of the 5 great precepts of lay life. And the 5th, not to indulge in intoxicants. Now, I suspect everyone would look at these 5 and say, yes, of course. But if we look carefully at each of these precepts and our own behavior, we may find that it's not so simple, and maybe we're not so virtuous as we thought. The fact is, we all violate these precepts one way or another at one time or another. Adherence to the moral teachings cannot be absolutely literal. So what is the important aspect of the precepts? It is practice. The practice of awareness of our own behavior, but without self-flagellation or self-punishment. It's one thing to say that I have sinned. It's quite another to say that I am a sinner. That just reinforces the ego self, which would accept the most vile behavior as long as its hegemony over behavior and thought is not challenged. But the overall thrust of the precepts in terms of our exploration of mind is just one word: separation. The moment there is the dual concept of self and other, the precepts will be violated inevitably. To kill, to steal, to engage in exploitive sex, to lie, to abuse drink and drugs, the one absolute requirement is a separation of self and other. There's no escape from that fact. So the real question is, how do we live as one, as mind only? If we can do that, then no separation is even possible. While recognizing the fact of one mind intellectually is relatively easy, to actually live that truth is very, very difficult. It requires that one be present in the absolute moment of here and now. Nevertheless, sometimes just the awareness of that possibility can have a profound effect on one's behavior. In closing this talk, let me quote an extended comment by the Buddha. He said, "The bliss of a religious life is attainable by everyone who walks the Noble Eightfold Path. One who clings to wealth had better cast it away than allow the heart to be poisoned by it. But one who does not cling to wealth and, possessing riches, uses them rightly, will be a blessing unto all sentient beings. It is not life and wealth and power that enslave us, but the clinging to life and wealth and power. The way of the Bodhisattva does not require one to go into homelessness or to resign the world, unless one feels called upon to do so. But the way of the Bodhisattva requires each individual to free themselves from the illusion of self, to cleanse the heart, to give up the thirst for pleasure, and lead a life of righteousness. And whatever people do, whether they remain in the world as artisans, merchants, and officers of government, or retire from the world and devote themselves to a life of religious meditation, let them put their whole heart into their task. Let them be diligent and energetic. And if they are like the lotus, which although it grows in the water, yet remains untouched by the water, if they struggle in life without cherishing envy or hatred, if they live in the world not a life of self, but a life of truth, then surely joy, peace, and bliss will dwell in their minds. Next time we'll take a closer look at family life and at each of the precepts. And together with all beings, we realize the way.